why do I actually have to disagree with the Planning Commission folks? Because fundamentally I have to, because I'm compelled to disagree with the government on all points. And the reason is very simple, because they've not been performing for the last few years, and they will never continue to perform, because it is not in their DNA to perform. The next question that actually arises is, because if you really look at the whole idea, when they actually end up saying that we have research-intensive universities, then I'm compelled to ask a question, that where are the research-intensive universities? Where is the research-intensive university in this country? If you actually talk about the IITs and the IIMs, they're absolutely not research-intensive, and that's period. Because for a simple reason, if they are supposed to do fundamental research, as Rameshan had actually said, they do not do any fundamental research. What are the number of patents that they actually come out with? Hardly anything. Have they created some impact in the world? Not at all. The only reason that IITs and IIMs are great is because of the great set of students that actually get in. There is nothing else that these institutions are actually doing to this country. At the end of the day, if I actually talk about the faculty as well, what is the contribution of faculty? Very simply negligible. And the reason is because the ecosystem does not exist. And what is the ecosystem that we need to require, or we require here? The ecosystem has to be, if a faculty needs to be understood, what is it that the faculty needs to do? He needs to do 2 or 3 things. He has to do research, he has to do consulting, he has to do his publications and teaching and so on and so forth. He's ineffective in all of them. If you talk about this ecosystem, the reason is very simple again. I have to ask a question. How many faculty in this country are actually trying to come out with some kind of business models around their research? Hardly any. In fact, if you really look at it, the biggest nemesis of this country is that the faculty is actually a socialist in the garb of teaching capitalism. That is where the problem actually starts. You have to change the very genesis that you need to actually have faculty who's a little more capitalistic in action. If you talk about the IITs and the IIMs, if I actually say that I'm going to have a professor who's going to start a company, suddenly all these guys will start jumping. For a simple reason, oh, you can't do this, this is anti-institution or what? No, this is not anti-institution, this is what needs to be done. If you really talk about the great institutions, in fact, Rameshan named 3 of them. He actually talked about Harvard, he talked about MIT, or he actually talked about other sets of institutions. What makes these people great? What makes these people great is that they've actually been able to create business models around their research. They actually monetize their research. They know what they are actually doing. If you talk about a typical business school professor, could be Mike Porter, but look at what he's actually done around his research. There is a whole huge fundamental idea of global competitiveness report which actually got around him. So why can't we actually do out here as professors? Why is it that we are not even creating that ecosystem? If you really talk about it, I think we are not willing to create brands. If you talk about a typical director at a business school, his biggest problem is if his faculty actually ends up becoming more popular than him, because that actually gives him a huge level of problem in terms of his ego massage and all that stuff. What do we need to do here? We need to actually create brands in business schools. We need to create brands in engineering institutions. We need to have faculty as brands. Nothing else would actually solve this problem. If we have to go ahead in this country, if you actually are talking about research, then the faculty will have to be actually asked to do a few things like this. The question here is, if I really talk about the bigger ecosystem that actually exists or not. In fact, we were talking about jobs. I think this is where we actually go wrong. This is where the Indian education system actually gets screwed up. For a simple reason, the moment I say that I'm actually looking at jobs, my students are getting 100% placement, I think it is the biggest crap in the world. For a simple reason, the reason for the existence of business schools in this country, if I talk about them, is not to actually create what I call as job seekers. It is the business of business school to actually create job creators. So are the business schools actually doing it? Not at all. So that means there is a whole huge failure of the ecosystem that actually exists here. Why can't I actually have that kind of a whole mindset? In fact, all IIMs today actually go out in the public and say that, okay, this is the job, this is the salary, and whatever. Why don't you understand that this is actually gross underutilization of talent? This is gross underutilization of resources. It's actually your hard-earned money that has actually gone into it. The next thing, if you talk about these institutions per se, we all talk about leverage in this country, financial leverage and so on and so forth. These are the set of institutions who are the most under-leveraged institutions in the country. What is the kind of turnovers that we are talking about? 200-acre campuses, 500-acre campuses, turnovers, 100 crores, 150 crores. Come on, let's understand it. In fact, it is better to sell off your land and ask some private sector guy to actually utilize it better and create better value than actually doing all this. So if you really look at it, we need to change ourselves. We need to change at all levels. We need to change faculty. We need to change mindsets. We need to change our views as to how the world is actually going to function.